I'll use these people mics, so forgetting as the day goes on. You need to turn off all your electronic devices. Also, please make sure that you're not taking pictures or recording this session. There's going to be a post-conference survey. If you have any concerns, please make sure that you share them there so that the planning committee can hear your thoughts. And I have the pleasure of introducing a very good friend of mine. This is Bill Bleak. And I'm so excited that he has chosen to present this year because he tends to think outside of the box, especially when it comes to your traditional performance. That's not what his thing says. I added that. This is what his thing says. Bill Bleak is in his 12th year of teaching secondary music. He currently teaches, it's funny, sorry, that's an inside joke, but that is funny. You wrote that. He currently teaches high school band and choir at Fowlerville High School, where he has been for 5 years. Mr. Bleak holds degrees in music education and educational technology from MSU. His teaching strives to build all-around musicians who can create, perform, and analyze the music around him. So here's Bill.
Thank you. Welcome to MMC. If you weren't here yesterday and this is your first session, thank you very much for spending your 8 a.m. coffee hour. My name is Bill Bleak. I teach at Fowlerville High School. At Fowlerville, I teach 2 concert ensembles, a concert band and a wind ensemble. I also teach a section of Y'all Come Sing Choir, no prerequisite. Most of them can't read music, but it's a lot of fun. And then I also co-teach 2 sections of our 6th grade beginning band. And I bring that up because what I'm going to talk about today, we do at Fowlerville all within the ensemble setting. At Fowlerville schools, the junior high, the high school, we do not offer a non-performing music class. There is no music theory class, no music technology, not even music appreciation. So what I want to talk about today is how we actually teach musicianship. And we hit all of these check boxes and how we're able to do that within the ensemble setting. So it's everything that I'm going to talk about today actually started at this conference a few years ago for me. I went through my high school band. I kind of went through probably a similar experience to most other secondary music educators. I was in what was traditionally considered a strong high school band program, ones at festival. We actually performed at this conference when it was in Ann Arbor. National Band Festival at Carnegie Hall. We had the traditional, solid, good band program. Did my undergraduate degree, got my first job teaching in a small rural school in Jackson County, started to build my band program in that model. And I started to come to this conference a little more regularly. And then I got dragged to an event at this conference by some friends of mine that are here today. And it's an event that I hope that you get dragged to, because it's tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the Ambassador Ballroom. And it's the MMA Honors Composition Concert. And if you don't know what that is, students kindergarten through 12th grade create an original piece of music. They create something out of nothing. It then gets sent to faculty, grad students in composition, evaluated, and the creme de la creme perform live tomorrow. And so I got dragged, and full disclosure, I walk into the Ambassador Ballroom, and I sit down and I get the program, and I see the kids' names, and the kids get to write their own bios, which is really entertaining. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how good could it really be? How good could it, really, how good could it be? Maybe there's going to be one piece that's really good, and then the others, maybe I'm going to hear variations on hot cross buns. And an hour and a half later, when the concert was done, I felt like the most inferior musician I have ever felt like in my life. I was an idiot. Because I had just witnessed an hour and a half of students out-musicking me by a mile. 7-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds doing something I could not fathom to do. I'd never written an original piece of music. And so, for the next days, weeks, months, it's caused a massive shift in how I viewed myself and the job that I have. And I looked at my past teaching experience, and I went, ultimately, I'm not doing what my job says I'm supposed to do. And I had to rethink how I'm going to go about this, because at the end of it, I realized, I hoped, that I'm not a band teacher. I'm a music teacher. Band happens to be my avenue, and choir now. But before all of that comes music. And so I had to take a look at that and go, okay, wait a second. I'm not doing this right. And it boiled down to one question. I had to simplify it because my brain, I needed one focal point. And the focal point was a question for me. And it's the question I start every year with. It's the question I end every year with. And that is, when my students leave my room, what can they really do? And then I add little tags onto it. What can they really do without an instrument in their hand? What can they really do, and how do they show it? What can they really do just by themselves? Because as a band director, a lot of my students, once they leave my room, their instrument leaves them. I'm not going to let them take Fowlerville High School's tuba with them for their life. Once they leave, unless they win the lottery and decide to buy their own Miraphone, their music education was halting. And so if I honestly answered that question 5-6 years ago, what can my students really do? Well, they could play their scales. Hopefully they could build a chord. Hopefully list Bach, Mozart, Beethoven in chronological order. Maybe they would be able to list you a piece of Beethoven. They would probably tell you that he was born deaf. And insert some weird anecdote that I told them and they grossly misinterpreted. But what could they really do? If I took away the tuba, the bari sax, the clarinet, whatever, how would I know that they were a musician? And how was I actually teaching music? And so this was discussions with friends and re-looking at the national standards and the Michigan benchmarks, and as enthralling reading as that is, I boiled it down to 3 things. So when my students leave my class, whether they graduate, whether they move to another district, whether they just drop the class, they can do 3 things. First, they can perform. This is easy. Most of us spend the vast majority of our classroom time performing. Most of us are very, very comfortable in teaching people how to perform because we were performers. We've done that a lot. We teach executive skill well. We talk about intonation, balance, blend, maybe even musical interpretation, stuff like that. Not a problem. Wasn't concerned there. My students can analyze. Now, analyze that's a huge umbrella. That's like saying you like rock music. That's just, it's a massive umbrella. Now, I had taught theory before. Yep, that's analytical skills. That's analyzing. But let's face it, unless your students are going to be a music major, they don't need to be able to quarterly analyze a Bach chorale. They don't need that. And it's great if they know that Beethoven kind of lived in the late 1700s. But if they don't understand the culture he was born into, that's useless. There needs to be context. My students need to be able to analyze music as a cultural phenomenon. It's wonderful if you know you can name all 4 Beatles. Maybe you throw in Pete Best for good measure and let it be like your mom's favorite song. And your dad always laughs when Yellow Submarine comes on because Ringo can't sing for anything. But if they don't understand the cultural impact of Beatlemania and they don't understand what music was like in 1962 and then what music was like in 1965, then what's the point? For our students, their music is their identity. It's their culture. And so what I want my students to be able to do is to be able to critically reflect on art as a cultural phenomenon. And then finally, the one that was and probably still is the scariest for me. My students have to create. Now, it's scariest for me because I had never had to do it. I was in a high school jazz band, but I was in the high school jazz band that you get the chart, and then if there were slash marks on solos, everybody just looked around at each other and went, "Please don't make eye contact with me, Mr. Pappenhagen." That's the jazz band I was in. So when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, I couldn't improvise, or at least I wasn't very confident at it. I couldn't create, let alone original composition, something out of nothing. Whew! But my students have to be able to do that. It's a Michigan benchmark. It's a national standard. And if we want to continue music's validity, we have to create. If you go to English class and for 4 years all you do is read other people's work, then you're just copying other people's stuff. You're regurgitating information. That's not music education. What I had been doing previously was performing education. It wasn't music education. I was teaching kids how to perform and to be a performer. But most of them are not going to be performers once they leave my room. So I need to teach them to be musicians. So what I'm going to do today is I want to highlight 2 projects that we do at Fowlerville High School. And if at the end of it, if you're really interested and you want to steal stuff from me, because a lot of what you're about to see I've stolen and modified from others, I am more than willing to share rubrics with you, student examples, whatever you need. If you want to modify it to your setting, that's what we want. So I'm not going to necessarily display like the rubric. I'm going to take you through some processes and basically how we do things. And if you want more, I've got contact information. I'd love to talk with you about it. Okay? I also want you to know that I tweak these every single year because every year something goes wrong. I get something wrong. And that's kind of the fun part, especially if it happens like in front of the kids. And you're like, oh my God. And everybody just kind of chuckles and then you move on. So these are constantly being modified, and I can tell you if it's going to be something that you want to borrow, I can say, careful of this, because this went really wrong for me the first time. The other thing I want to highlight before we get into this is that what these 2 projects that I'm going to highlight require no technology. Fowlerville Junior High School is one-to-one in Chromebooks, but the high school is not. So I can't assume that my students have readily accessible technology. Many of them do, but I don't assume any of that. So this can be done without technology. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about, it focuses on this idea of creating. And we call it the Pop Rock Cover Project. It's slowly modified, and it's actually, in the high school, it's a third of the student's final exam. But it is exactly what it sounds like. Students cover a pop or rock song. They choose their own groups. They choose their own song. I put some basic requirements in front of them. But the idea here is to create without the intimidation of creating something out of nothing. If I said, write me a piece of music, where do I start? Is the look I get from a lot of students. But if I said, all right, we're gonna take this, scale it down a little bit. Pick a pop rock song. You're going to cover it. The cool thing, because in an instrumental setting, is there's no words, so you don't need to worry about school inappropriate songs. If they want to do Baby Got Back for Bassoon Trio, let's light it up, man. Let's do it. So students get to select their own groups. I limit it from 2 to 5. Anything past 5 gets kind of muddy. And part of the experience is not working alone. It's working with somebody else. So I really, really shy away from solo work. Last year I did have one student who asked me to do solo, and she used GarageBand and looping, and it was really well done. And so I made an exception there. But in general, I want that collaboration with somebody else. So these are the basic requirements. The creation, then, is going to come in 2 elements. The first one is 4C there, the variation. So one of the things that they have to do is each group member needs to throw in some kind of variation on the melody. Now, I always tell them, I don't need Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Christina Aguilera. Some of them give me that because that's where they are musically, but some of them are way more simple. And so they might just take a simple melody and maybe they add like a little ornament or just something very, very simple. It gets them to create, and it gets them to understand deeper the music that they're hearing. Now, another reason not to go with 5 people is every group member has to do this. So if you have 5 people in a group, performances can get a bit long. Now, why does it need to be in its original key? Well, there's 2 reasons. First, they are not allowed to use sheet music at all, at all, at all. They cannot Google poker face for flute, and then Google image, and boom, there's poker face arranged for flute quartet, I guess. Everything they do, they have to do by ear. Everything. And so one of the things that I encourage them to do as they're thinking about songs, and I tell them, you can pick your jam. Pick like the song that defines you. But then I always say, but make sure that you've transcribed like the first 4 or 5 or 6 notes so that you basically know what key you're going to be operating in. Because every so often you get somebody that goes, I'm going to do Don't Stop Believin'. Oh, I love that tune. Yeah, man, that's awesome. I love Glee. And then they start transcribing it and they figure out it's an E major. And they go, nope, see ya. I'm going to go with Let It Be. So original key. The other thing, the reason I don't want them to use sheet music is because I need them to look at each other when they're performing. I mean, think about in a performing ensemble, their eyes usually are on one person because we've got all the answers. So we're trying to communicate to them, they're trying to communicate to us. But how often do they actually have to look at each other? Or breathe together and give each other cues, get in and out of a chorus, signal when we're going to move on to the next verse. I'm finding that that's actually the hardest part about this now, is to get kids to look each other in the eye. That's insanely uncomfortable for a lot of adolescents. So the basic layout, I've put work sessions. A work session for us, our class periods, by the time they get their instrument out, ready to go, and then pack up time at the end, they usually get about 45 to 50 minutes per work session. So I break this down, and every day that I give them a work day, if I say that, Tuesday is going to be a cover project day, guys, I give them a goal, and I usually will give it in 3 tiers. If you are here, then here's where I expect you to be, and then steps, so that even genius kid knows what is expected of him. So step one, we cannot move on until every single person in your group can play the melody. Every single person. And I spot check it. You have to go and, okay, let's hear it. Can they play the melody in pulse? They have to be able to do that. Because if they can't do that, we're sunk. And that usually takes 1 to 2 work sessions. If they've picked a simple song or somebody who's not a super powerhouse vocalist, and they've never done this before, it's going to start slow. But once they get the first 4 or 5 notes and they realize that most singers are just going to repeat those same 4 or 5 notes ad nauseum, maybe in a different order, it starts to speed up. And they usually get it pretty quick. So 1 to 2 work sessions. Stage 2. All members have to be able to play the bass line. Now by bass line, I don't mean the literal bass guitar part. Or, if they're covering Red Hot Chili Peppers, I don't need my bass clarinetist throwing down slat bass parts. That's not going to happen. What I mean is the basic chordal structure. Now, I don't know how many students you have that listen to music and go, God, that bass line is amazing. I have virtually none. I've got one, Bryant, who will listen to something and it's that student that digests on a different level than his peers. But for the most part, they're not listening to the bass part. And it's hard because when you tell them, okay, you're going to listen to this tune, figure out the bass part, you have to ignore the jam part. You've got to listen to Taylor Swift without listening to Taylor Swift. That's hard. So I usually frame it. And I say, okay, we've established key, right? Because everybody's got the melody. So you've established key. Let's say we're in the key of F. Okay, guys, we're in the key of F. 95% of pop and rock songs are going to use chords based on do, fa, so, and la. I use solfege to give them a common language. Otherwise, the flute player talking to the clarinet player is bad stuff. So I said, if you're lost, if you have no idea, try going 1, 5, 6, 4. See if that works. And I usually have one group per year that is doing a song that does something other than that. If it's a really lower group that's having a really tough time, I'll usually recommend tunes to them, like early blues tunes, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, all those 12-bar blues tunes, and they can usually latch onto those really well. Then after that comes the fun part, but the difficult part for me as a teacher, and that's the decision-making process. How is your cover going to be unique? Because I don't want you just going up there and performing what has been performed before. How's it going to be unique? For some of my advanced students, sometimes they'll take a major tune and make it into minor. They'll flat 3, 6, and 7. Maybe they're going to make an up-tempo dance tune a ballad. But here's the hard part as a teacher. Because remember, I don't want to just rehearse, perform, rehearse, perform, rehearse, perform. It would be so easy for me to walk in. Mr. Bleak, we're having a really hard time. We're stuck. I could walk in. Okay, here's the answer. You could do this here, and then this here, and then you play the bass line and just give them the answer, and then they go, thank you. I didn't do anything. I just gave them the sheet music. That's just what I did. They didn't do anything. There was no creation there. So it's maybe you give them a little bit, hey, have you thought about altering who's going to play the bass line? Work with that. I'll come back in 10 minutes. Let me know what you come up with. And this is the slow process. And this is a process as a teacher where you have to be insanely diligent. Because this could also be distraction time. If they're stuck and their inclination is, I'll get this done at home. No, they won't. Let's be honest. No, they won't. So it's diligent. So, hey, I'm going to be back in 10 minutes. Play that for me a different way. I want to highlight one example for you. This is a percussion quintet, obviously, that I had last year. Now, in my requirements, I state that percussionists must use pitched percussion only. That's simply because I just don't want them playing drum set. I'll just play drum set, or my favorite, no, I'll play quad toms. Oh. This was a relatively exceptional quintet, and so they came to me and they said, can we use some cymbals and a drum as color instruments? And I went, I'm going to come down on you if it's something other than that. And they went, no, we're fine. Okay. This is Avenged Sevenfold, A Little Taste of Heaven. Now, if you know that song, it is not school appropriate. It's not even close. But they wanted to tackle it. I typically shy kids away from heavy metal just because those guitar solos are brutal to transcribe. But they did it. So what I like about this is how they set themselves up. They did this all on themselves. So they've got a timpani in the middle, which the two on the left are going to use. We've got two marimbas there, xylophone, vibraphone. The vibraphonist is going to pull out a bow at one point. I was like, wow, that is a really cool color change. So they're really thinking about how can we make this tune original, and I hope this plays. We're not going to listen to all of it. And now it's not going to work, is it? Oh! Joe, what happened? There we go. So as I heard them rehearsing, each work session, the use of the vibraphone came up a lot. How are we going to use that? Because it's not typically a heavy metal instrument. It's a really unique color. So had a lot of inner debate on that. What's the role of the second marimba? Now, of these 5, only one of them is majoring in music, wants to be a musician for the rest of their life. But I look at this and I go, that's musicianship. That's using ears. That's communicating. That's... So, they are on my high end. I mean, that's one of the really, really good ones. And for each really good one, there's one that you just hope that they end together. And we get that. That's part of teaching music. But I kind of loved just sitting in and watching them rehearse. They were kind of that group that I would just throw out a question, and then 20 minutes later they would go, okay, here's how we handled that. So obviously this requires a lot of aural skill. And this is something that I was not really strong in. Maybe you were awesome at ear training and sight singing your freshman year of undergrad, but I was horrible at it. It was always fa mi for me. I could not hear fa mi for the life of me. So starting in 6th grade, we get the aural work pumping. It's simple echo. Maybe a call and response. Hey, I'm going to play a pattern to you. You, same note but a different rhythm. We teach tonic and dominant really, really early in 6th grade. We're going to play a tonic pattern to you. You play a dominant pattern back. Theme and variations. 6th grade again, we're going to play hot cross buns. Actually, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. We did this last week. Okay, I want you to take the first 2 bars, do, do, so, la, la, so. Change one of those notes. I don't care which one you change, but just change one of them. Now change 2 of them. Oh, all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, I've actually got to listen to which one makes the most sense. Jazz improvisation. If you're unfamiliar with the iReal app, just do yourself a favor and purchase that before you leave the conference. That thing is amazing. It's a jazz app, chord changes, backup bands. You can do it in a virtual funk style. You can do bluegrass. It's awesome, but we'll throw that on through the speakers, just a little 12-bar blues tune, and we'll do echo or improvisation that way. Or transcribing a pop song. That one takes a little bit longer. The first 4 of these we use as warm-ups. They take 5 minutes, maybe. Transcribing's a little bit longer. At Fowlerville, we teach the 12-bar blues as soon as they have learned F, E flat, and B flat. That's a great way to start. A great way to start. Get them using their ears. Then you can you can start playing Hound Dog. You can sing for them. You can do your best Elvis impression. They think that's great. So that's stuff we do to prep that. The next project that I want to share with you is relatively new to us. And I call it connecting the visual or the musical to the visual. And this all started for me with a unit on Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. And so one of my favorite pieces of music, and it started innocently enough. I wanted to share with them The Great Gate of Kiev and Hut on Fowl's Legs. Love that tune. Sounds like I call it classical heavy metal. That tune just sounds like it needs a heavy metal guitarist in it. And all of a sudden, as I'm teaching, literally, as I'm giving this lecture, and we're looking at the pictures, I'm going, wait a minute, guys, we're going to do something. It's one of those where you made a promise to the kids before you had thought it through. Guys, we're going to be doing a project related to this next week. And you go home and you're like, okay, all right, hashtag no filter. How are we going to do this? The basic premise is that students need to be able to think like a composer. They need to think about the genesis of a work. We can all appreciate that Beethoven 9 is maybe the greatest piece of music ever. But it's even more amazing if you think of what came before it and the genesis of such a monster piece of work. Mahler 8, Mahler 2, these massive works. Think about the genesis of them. And I want students to be able to take a critical look at visual artwork as a musician. That was different. And I got a little bit of blowback from students going, why are we looking at pictures? It's band. Stick with me. It gets back to that understanding that artists do not live in isolation from each other. Schoenberg was an inventor, a painter. Mahler was had a whole circle of artists. We don't live in isolation from each other. So what do students have to do? Well, they are paired up. I pair them up because they're not actually going to work together. This is a solo project. And they select a piece of visual art from given choices. Here's what I do. Here's what I'm doing this year. I select a featured artist. For example, my wind ensemble this year is going to do Vasily Kandinsky, who's an abstract expressionist, kind of like Dots and Shapes. The tree is not a tree kind of thing. And I give them a whole bunch of paintings. You pick one. You have to then describe for me in essay form, part one is in essay form, how you would compose a piece of music based on that visual. And you need to get really specific. I want tempos, articulations, orchestrations. I want to know what mode you're in. I want to know if there are changes, is there manipulation. I want to be able to hear this thing in my head. Step 3, they need to be able to compose just a little bit. Now, some students go, hey, can I just compose the full-blown work and then write a shorter essay? Yeah, yep, sure. But for most of them, they're like, we'll submit the breadth of it in the essay, but then I ask for 4 to 8 bars of like one line, one melody I might find in there. Just something simple. Then after they're all done, the reason that they're partnered up is after they've submitted everything to me, I've graded it, I've given it back, they then are given their partner's project, who had the same piece of visual artwork, and they're going to compare and contrast. Because they're going to sign a little disclaimer for me at the beginning of the project that they will not discuss or work with their partner during the genesis of the work. I want 2 pieces of music based on the same visual. Now, if your administration loves the idea of writing across the curriculum, bingo! It's a great one. If your administration loves collaboration in different sects of the school, bingo! You bring in the art teacher, maybe you bring in a student artist, and you collaborate. And it's amazing what these kids come up with. So last year I put no requirement on the artist they chose. So I had a student, a junior last year, choose the painting Washington Crossing the Delaware. You know that painting, Washington, mighty, patriotic, I love America, crossing the Delaware. And so his essay was, we had played Holst the year before, and American marches, so we had this discussion of the different treatment of the idea of a march in England versus the United States. And so he writes me this essay. It's one of those jaw-dropping moments. And his essay was based around this march theme that in the beginning of the piece was treated in a very British style, very articulate, nothing over-aggressive, nothing brash. But as the piece moved on and it got more aggressive, it started to take on an American tinge. And then he went, because what was once British is now slowly evolving and is now American. And I went, whoa! I never would have come up with that. I had a student do The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali, or as most of the students referred to it as, Melting Clocks. Is that Melting Clocks? What's the hair on the funny nose thing on the ground? Don't worry about it. And so what he did was he chose to manipulate tempo and tonality at different times to give the idea of time stretching and warping and folding over. And he used instruments like euphonium, bass, clarinet, so that it was nothing that you necessarily... He said, I don't want you going home humming this tune. I want you to feel unsteady. I want you to question. I had one of the percussionists in that, the female, all the way on the left, chose Andy Warhol's soup cans. And her piece, she said, I'm only going to use soup cans as instruments. And for every different color, we're going to treat the soup can differently. So the yellow soup can, that's going to be a bright up-tempo. We're going to use lots of the sides and try to get, a metallic spoon. And the more muted colors are going to, experiment with like scraping stuff over the top. I never would have thought of that. I'm 34. That's more musicianship than I ever showed in high school. So it was really, really cool. Now, I gave this little presentation to my wind ensemble, and they didn't know about the Kandinsky requirement yet. So I went, I told them you're going to do Kandinsky, which is just kind of like dots and shapes, and they all kind of went, oh, because I showed them a Kandinsky painting, and they just kind of went, no, I promise I'm going to make it easier for you. Because I actually had that moment when I studied abroad. I was introduced to Kandinsky and the musicianship within Kandinsky and that element. Now, if you're looking for great ways to start something like this, I started with pictures at an exhibition, because that's an easy one. It's in the standard rep. If you're a band director, Samuel Hazo's written a piece of music called Blue and Green Music. It's like grade 3-ish. And it's based on Georgia O'Keeffe's painting of the same name. So it's a Georgia O'Keeffe painting that is not a flower. So if you know Georgia O'Keeffe, don't worry, you're not going to have to worry about the flower. But it is amazingly musical. She entitled it Blue and Green Music, and there's direction in it. And so you can listen to the piece. We played the piece one year and then looked at the visual, and that's a great way to start that discussion. The cover of La Mer, when Debussy first came out with it, was The Great Wave Off Kanagawa by Hakusai, which is, if you don't know, once you see it, you're going to be like, oh yeah, that. That's a way to start. And then Rachmaninoff wrote The Isle of the Dead after taking a look at that painting by Böcklin. So those are great ways to do it. Now, what about the choral setting? Because I teach choir too, and I want my choir kids to create. We're not going to do paintings in choir. We're going to do poems. So most of my choir kids don't read music. I have 35 in my y'all come sing, and 28 of them can't read a note of music. So we're going to do poems. Pick a poem. How would you set it? Would it be male voices, female voices, both? How are you going to treat that line? So it's a built-in unit on text painting. So how do we convince our stakeholders here? So this has slowly evolved at Fowlerville High School over a period of 4 years to the point that my students' grades now, their year-long grades are based 30% on performance, 20% on creation, 20% on analysis, and 30% on participation. It is part of their grade. They could be an all-state oboe player, but if they give no effort to create or analyze, they will not receive an A in band. Because that's only performing. That's a portion of what you do. We are music educators. We are not performing educators. That's a portion of what we do. So pull in your other teachers and staff. I don't know where your classroom is in your building. My classroom is the furthest possible point from my main office. I am not exaggerating when I say the entrance to the varsity football stadium is closer to the main office than my band room is. So man, are we good at being isolationists as fine arts educators. Just going to sit in my hub. I'm not going to worry about the SAT. Just let me do what I do. And that does us no good. So pull in other people. Pull in your art teacher. Everybody's got somebody on their staff that plays guitar or has written a song. Get them down and listen to some of those cover projects. Pull in administrators. Publicize your successes. So I record all of the cover projects. And I put them on our band YouTube site, but I put it on private. And then if students want their recording, I share it with them. But if you've got a good one, and you have permission from students and parents, tweet it out and tag the original artist. Who knows what's going to happen? Maybe nothing. Probably nothing. But what if Taylor Swift retweeted you? Done! I want that on my final evaluation. Retweeted by Taylor Swift. It's on the resume. Let's do it. Highly effective. Give me that $50 incentive at the end of the year. If you have Composers from project number 2. Give a lecture recital. Last year I had one of my students, actually one of the percussionists, his choice of visual artwork was a painting that a friend of his had done on censorship. And so he wrote this waltz, and as the waltz progressed, each time it repeated the main theme, one part of the main theme was gone until it was nothing but 1, 5, 1, 5, 5, 1. But he did it with one of his friends off the painting. Students collaborating? Holy cow. That's amazing. But those are the easy people to convince. The hard part is what happens when you have to convince the parents and the kids. So this was a slow process. This has taken about 4 years to get here. I didn't go, all right, this year, show up, don't be an idiot, do your playing quizzes, don't miss a concert, and you can't get worse than an A- to radical change. It was definitely weaning it in. Okay? But it gets back to convincing your stakeholders of what it is you actually do. So I had a parent that I get along with very, very well, active in the booster organization, came to conferences, sat down in the gym, and said, Mr. Valik, I don't know how to politely say this. That's always a great way to start the conversation. How the hell does my kid have a C in band? And I pulled up the grade. I said, oh, that's a great question. Let's take a look. Student had no missing work. Bona fide had a C. So I explained, had a hard time on this assignment, could have shown more work on this assignment. And I said, let me try to explain it to you in a different way. Would you agree, Mr. Band Parent, that your student's math grade is an accurate reflection of their understanding of mathematical concepts? And he said, yeah, I would agree with that statement. And I said, then it's my belief that their grade in band, music, the only music class we offer, should be an accurate reflection of their understanding of musical concepts. At which point there was an awkward pause where I feared for the volume of the room. And he went, yeah, okay, I guess I'm down with that. Whew, that could have gone south fast. And so, like a good parent, he went to his kid and went, we're going to start showing some more effort on this, right? Yeah, and students got an A now. I do assess on a bit of a work ethic bell curve too. Because we cannot assume that the music education that our students have before they enter our room has been equal. It is unfair for me to take a student who has grown up in a house of music. They have been singing songs since birth. There's a piano in the home, mom and dad sing, versus the student that shows up to 6th grade instrument rental night. I don't know why my kid wants to be in band. I wasn't in band. My wife wasn't in band. I'm pretty sure I'm tone deaf. Okay. Those students, we cannot grade them equally. So work ethic allows me to give a little benefit to those that have a little bit harder time. Hey, if you bust your butt for me, I'm going to do what I can. I'm not going to take a D student to an A, but I'm going to help you. And it also allows me to take the musical genius and go, you're not doing what you are capable of. Stop sitting there on natural talent. And that helps a little bit. And then giving constant feedback. If my students think for 1 second that this is just something else we do, then it's done. It's pointless. Hey guys, the superintendent says we need to do more writing across the curriculum, so this is what we're going to do. Clunk. Done. They're cashed out. Because there's no validity to it. No, guys, we're actually going to participate in music making. This is valid. So it gets back to, what can my students really do? What can they really do? Hopefully, they can talk about the importance of Led Zeppelin to American blues music. Hopefully, they can talk about why Beethoven 5 is so amazing. Hopefully, they can look at a piece of artwork and basically go, oh, that's kind of cool, that movement there. And hopefully, above all else, they understand why we do what we do. We're not an elective. We are here because we think that we are as important as math. I had an angry teacher in a staff meeting about 6 years ago go, "You really don't think that music's more important than math, do you?" And I kind of went, "Yeah, I do." And I ended it there because I was civil. But they need to understand that societies don't exist without their art, without their music. So if we're going to prolong that, then we need to get them to do that. It's doing. It's not recreating, it's doing. This is my contact information. That's my personal Twitter handle and our high school band's Twitter handle, my email address, and then our band's website and my personal website. Those are great ways to get in touch with me. I'm going to put this up. I've been recording it. The thing's on a swivel. It's pretty cool, actually. We've got a wireless adapter in here, so that iPad follows me wherever I go, unless you move really fast, or you do it in front of sixth graders, and then you just see hands flying everywhere. If you want anything I've got, if you just want to troubleshoot, if you want to steal, please let me know. We have got like 2 or 3 minutes. We're good. Okay.
He's tall.
I'm relatively easy to find. I'm on the taller end of life. Thank you very, very much for coming out at 8 a.m. I hope that you have a wonderful conference. And, thank you.